Hello everyone, welcome into today's video recap from the 2014 or 2014 Millionaire Open held in Las Vegas. Sitting at 1-0 with a win over the highest rated player in the field. At this point I was feeling very confident, but obviously there was a long way to go with 6 rounds in front of me, and this round I was paired off against someone a little bit lower at around my level. I was coming into this event rated 1856 and my opponent was 1850. I had the white pieces. Traditionally, for several years there, I mostly played f4 in my over-the-board games, and that's what I did here, was played f4, and my opponent played d5, which is, I would say, the top response against f4, just taking control of this e4 square. White is fighting for the e5 square, black is fighting for the e4 square. I played knight f3, continuing with my strategy, take control of this e5 square, and knight f6. This is one of the ways a lot of people will choose to play against this line. And I played b3. So what I like to do when I play this opening is use my knight, my pawn, and my bishop on the long diagonal to control this e5 square. Typically, a lot of people, whether they're Sicilian type players or not, will at some point play c5 and knight c6. And at that point, I usually like to have at my disposal the option, the pawn to already be on e3 and to play bishop b5. And the idea behind that line is to fight for control over the e5 square by always being ready to give up this light square bishop for the knight, because typically this knight is one of the few pieces that's guarding this square. So that's just a little bit about my thought process when I played f4, play the bird's opening. My opponent plays c5, which is one of the top moves here. And I played pawn to e3. I have played this opening a staggering amount of times, not only online but over the board. In fact, there was a period of probably 5 to 10 years where this is basically all I played as white. So I am very comfortable in this position, and I've got a lot of unique ideas that I can use in this structure for white. My opponent played knight c6, which is very thematic, you know, after you play c5 to follow up with knight c6. And I played bishop b5. Again, I am fighting for control over this e5 square by threatening to potentially eliminate this knight, which currently is the only piece protecting this square. And this is kind of an undervalued idea, giving up the bishop for this knight, because a lot of people will tell you, well, I would rather have the bishop pair. And while that a lot of times is the case, and having the two bishops can be useful in a position, this idea of bishop takes c6 is very undervalued. And we're going to see here in a second why that is. My opponent played bishop d7. And I just played bishop b2. And typically at some point, whether it's this move or the next move, or maybe even the move after that, my opponent will play a6 and put the question to my bishop. And he did that right away here. And really, if we go to a4, we get our bishop trapped with b5. c4 is covered. d3 doesn't make any sense. And bishop e2, there's not really much of a future for this bishop on e2. So most of the time, pretty much all the time, I'd say 99% of the time, I will play bishop takes c6. Whether they're in a scenario where they have to take with the b pawn because it's the only piece defending the knight, or the bishop's defending. Bishop takes c6 is the most principled move. And what always surprises me here is a lot of people will play bishop d7. And presumably you would figure, well, your opponent wants to be able to answer bishop takes c6 with bishop takes c6 and avoid creating these double c-pawns on the queen side. And so it always surprises me when my opponents will choose to play b takes c6 when they have at their disposal bishop takes c6. And this actually makes me happy because this is a position that white can play for a win. If you notice, these queenside pawns, the C pawns and the A pawn, are very, very weak. And white is able to generate play against those pawns if he knows what he's doing. So knight e5 is a very natural move. We've been fighting for control over this e5 square. So let's put our knight on it. Now that there's no piece, no knight on c6 that could swap itself off, this knight just takes up a very, very powerful position. Black will play e6 to get his bishop out, and I castled. And I have to say, guys, of all the tournament games I've played with f4 over the years, my winning percentage is probably 70 to 80%. So I'm very, very, very comfortable in this position right now. Solidly got a +1 advantage, but this is a position I typically win with the white pieces. Let's see if I was able to pull it off. Bishop e7. You can play bishop e7 or bishop d6. And d3. The idea behind d3 is I would like to play knight d2. And I would like to keep my bishop open on the dark square diagonal as much as possible. If you play knight c3 instead, that can get a little annoying for you because your opponent may play d4 and put the question to your knight right away. And if you take in some scenarios, you've allowed black to get rid of his pawn weakness, and then you're forced to move your knight, and then he can play c5. And this position is just not as promising as it was a second ago for white. So that's one reason to avoid knight c3 in a lot of these lines. So d3 is the move to play. And my opponent played castles. And somewhere around this point, I looked at this game earlier today. And obviously it's been a lot of years since I played this game. I made a decision here in the next several moves that I would not make today. Which probably is why I did end up losing this game. Because I decided to go for a pawn storm on the king side here in a few moves. And that left my king very, very exposed. And my opponent took advantage of that fact. With that being said, what is the correct course of action? If I'm going to go knight c3 at some point, the only reason to go knight c3 is to play knight a4 and to put pressure on the c5 pawn. And then what I want to do is play c4, knight c3, knight a4, c4 to lock this c5 pawn down, and play bishop a3 and start putting pressure on this pawn on the c file that can't move. That is how I would choose to approach this position if I had this game over to do. So I naturally continued my development here. I played c4, which it has the idea of locking this c5 pawn down so that it's easier to attack it later in the game. a5. a5 is a very natural move in this type of position. Black would love to play a4 and get rid of one of his pawn weaknesses on the queen side. Typically in a lot of positions when my opponent plays a5 in this type of structure, I would have a4 at my disposal. The issue with a4 is that after rook b8, I'm kind of locked down to defending this b3 pawn, which is something I would like to avoid. So yeah, I played g4, which is not an awful move. It doesn't lose the game. It just kind of exposes my king. And like I said, my opponent is able to take advantage of that fact. Knight d7. So right away now my opponent is bringing some pressure here. And the idea is that he's probably going to play bishop f6. Bring another attacker against this knight. And then possibly if knight takes knight, there's going to be bishop takes bishop on b2. Which is very strong for black. So the other idea behind knight d7 is he is opening the possibility to play f6. And to kick my knight off of e5 or force it to trade itself off for the passive knight on d7. So I decided to play g5, and this is really where I started going too far with my kingside pawn pushes, because my opponent played f6, and now I have a dilemma. He is putting the pressure against my knight on e5. He's also got two attackers going towards this g5 pawn. So he is really forcing me at this point to make a crucial decision. And I opted to take on d7. Again, this is not an awful move. It is not losing the game. But the moves I played moving forward after this create too many targets on my king side. Black takes. And I played h4. And this is really the first mistake in this game. I am not in a position to be able to just start pushing all these kingside pawns forward. To this point, prior to h4, I'm doing fine. I'm even slightly better in this position. But h4 is just taking it a little bit too far. I do have to keep in mind, black has both bishops, and he has the possibility to play e5 and open the position very, very quickly for his two bishops. And this is the idea that got me in trouble, because after h4, my opponent played e5. And now he's beginning to put the pressure on me. He has pressure on my g5 pawn, on my f5 pawn. The light squared bishop is now free to roam, possibly to h3 and create some pressure here. And this bishop is putting pressure on this diagonal. Also has possibilities to go to d6. Also ideas, guys, that the black queen might be able to get into g3 and cause some issues. So what was a slightly better position for me has become a worse position just because I've moved the h pawn. So let's see how my opponent was able to take advantage of this. I tried to defend my king with queen g2. Again, guys, this is not a losing position. It's just slightly more unpleasant for me. It's the moves to follow that made this a losing position. One other idea of queen g2 is I am actually bringing another attacker against d5. So I do have my pawn and my queen attacking here. My opponent played f4, a very, very strong decision. He has the two bishops. He needs to open the king side for those bishops to be able to operate. When you have the bishop pair, you want to open the position so the bishops have room to play. And now I took back on f4. And from this point on, black kind of dominates this game. Queen d6, rook a e1. I'm trying to bring both of the rooks to the e file, which is very natural. Because once they're both on the e file, black's going to have to defend his bishop or move it backwards. Which is going to put it in an even more passive position where it's not doing as much as it could be. The problem is, after bishop f5, black creates a direct threat to capture this pawn on d3. If he's able to capture this pawn, then he's going to be attacking my rook. And he's also going to be bringing pressure against the c pawn. And I played rook e3. And after rook a e8, d4 was stronger, blocking off my dark squared bishop, attacking the rook and forcing it to move. But there's nothing wrong with rook a to e. It is very strong as well, just not the best move. And after rook f to e1, a very natural move, hoping that if my opponent moves the dark squared bishop, I can take the rook. Rook takes, and then rook takes, and I'm a rook ahead, and I just win. But chess is not always that simple. My opponent played d4, very, very strong move, blocking off my dark squared bishop and attacking my rook. And I made this position worse for myself by playing rook g3. I thought I was keeping an eye over my d3 pawn, which needs to be guarded, but in reality, this just allows the f4 pawn to fall. So now from a slightly worse position, I am now in a losing position because my king is just going to be too exposed. And if you guys notice, the rooks, the bishop has potential to come into d6 and create some threats. This bishop is very nice on f5. My king isn't going to be able to survive this. This has gone from being slightly worse to completely losing. I played rook f1, and queen e5. And basically at this point, guys, this is a -5 position for white, which just means he's completely losing. And I kind of lashed out. I tried to complicate the issue. I did not resign here, which actually would have been justifiable because I'm just dead lost. And I decided to try to create chaos and see if I could come back in this game. And I played rook takes bishop. Just trying to create complications. Trying to give myself the e4 square for my knight. Bring the bishop back. Try to complicate the issues. And sometimes this works, but not as much when you're playing strong opponents. Like 1800 plus, this doesn't usually work as well. And my opponent converted very nicely. Queen f5. I brought the knight into e4. He opened the position. My king is very exposed. That's a very natural idea. Takes, takes. G6. So he's potentially avoiding me pushing G6 myself. Forcing HG6. And then the black king is more open. Bishop A3. I thought maybe I can bring some pressure against C5. Try to keep his pieces tied down to defending this. But my opponent played rook F7. His idea is that he simply wants to go rook F8 and probably come into F1, force the queens off, and then just checkmate me or trade material. I tried to get out of that. Rook F8, bishop C1, and queen E5, very strong. So he's pinning my rook to my king, absolute pin. And then he has ideas of playing bishop D8, bishop C7. When you have a piece that's absolutely pinned, a lot of times the best course of action is to attack the pinned piece. The other idea he has is just to play rook F3. He is up material, he's up the exchange, a rook for a knight. So it's good to trade equal for equal because he's probably going to win this position in that situation. So bishop D2, hitting the A5 pawn. Bishop D8, he's just trying to go to C7. King H3, just trying to get out of the possibility that he's going to attack this rook with bishop C7 and put in an absolute pin. So now I'm just freeing the rook to move. But after queen F5 check, king H4, he played H6. And I cannot play G takes H6 because the G pawn is absolutely pinned to the king. Rook G4. At this point, there's nothing I can do about what's coming. In fact, I could have just resigned. Takes on G5, check. Bishop takes. And Rook H7, utilizing the 7th rank to check my king. Forcing King G3. And after Bishop C7, I just decided to resign. With proper play at this point, guys, the most moves I can survive is 8 moves. So, Bishop F4 would come. Black would play Bishop F4. And on Rook F4, Queen F4 is mate. So King F2 is the only way to survive longer. Bishop G3 double check. Again, this is how it could have ended. King G1. Bishop H2 check. King cannot step on the F file. If Queen takes the bishop, then the rook just takes. So King H1. And then Black has discovered checks. Bishop F4 check. White has to start dropping pieces in order to avoid mate temporarily. Rook takes rook. King G1. Bishop E3 check. King can't step on the H file. He can't step on the F file. He has to block with his knight or his queen. Queen blocks. And then there's just bishop takes F2. Again, if knight takes F2, there's queen F2. So King F1 is the only move to prolong the game. But at this point, White is just down so much material. He may as well resign instead of put himself through this. Bishop E3. King E1, Queen F1 is mate. So, going back towards the beginning portion of this game, first of all, at this point, in this position, I can tell you guys, I usually outplay people from this position. This is a solid +1 at this point for me, and it can become a big advantage for me. And at a later point, I'll post some of my victories in this position with the white pieces are very nice. But for some reason, I went a little bit crazy. And I started pushing the pawns around my king too soon. I should have built this up if I was going to build for this idea. Maybe play rook f2, rook g2. Maybe slide the king into the corner, bring the rooks to the g file. But I went a little bit off the deep end. And after h4, I went from a slightly better position to one where black was just able to dominate. So I think the lesson in this game is just be very, very careful pushing those pawns around your king, because you can't move them back, and you can get yourself in big trouble. Alright guys, if you like this lesson, please give it a thumbs up on the YouTube. Subscribe to the channel. I also have links, guys, to my TikTok, my Instagram, and my Facebook Reels that I'm doing every day, and those are, I'm throwing some nice little puzzles out there for you guys to look at every day, and I would definitely appreciate support on that end. Like I said, you guys continue to support, comment on the videos. That's only going to encourage me to do more of this free type content. Anyway, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys later. Thanks for everything.